Hey everyone, welcome back to Behind the Crime Scene. Before we dive into today's story, if you're new here, please hit that subscribe button. We bring you the most intriguing true crime cases from around the world, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming up on this channel. Today, we're covering a case that absolutely devastated a community in far north Queensland, Australia. It's the tragic story of Toyah Cordingley, a young woman whose life was cut short in the most horrific way imaginable. And here's what makes this case so compelling. Even though someone has been convicted, there are still questions that remain unanswered. Questions about motive, questions about what really happened that day, and questions about whether we know the whole story. But before we get into the details, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from right now? Are you from Australia? The United States, maybe somewhere in Europe or Asia? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love knowing where our community is tuning in from, and it really helps us understand what kind of stories resonate with people around the world. Also, as we go through this case, I want you to keep an open mind, think critically about the evidence. And when we're done, tell me, do you think all the questions have been answered? Or are there still pieces of this puzzle that don't quite fit? Keep that in mind, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. All right, let's get into it. Toyah Jade Cordingley was just 24 years old when her life was taken from her. She lived in Cairns, a beautiful coastal city in far north Queensland, Australia. If you've never been to Cairns, it's absolutely stunning. It's known for the Great Barrier Reef, lush rainforests, and beautiful beaches. It's a tourist destination, a place where people go to feel safe, to relax, to enjoy nature. Toyah was the kind of person everyone seemed to love. She worked at a local pharmacy, helping people with their medications and health needs. But her real passion? Animals. Toyah was deeply involved with the Paws and Claws animal shelter, where she volunteered regularly. She'd walk dogs, clean facilities, bottle feed puppies, and stay late into the night if an animal needed extra care. Her friends and co-workers described her as warm, friendly, and genuinely compassionate. She had this natural ability to connect with both people and animals. She was also very active on social media, often posting about the animals at the shelter, encouraging people to adopt and advocating against animal cruelty. Now, Toyah's parents had separated when she was just 2 months old, but both remained very involved in her life. They loved her deeply, and she maintained close relationships with both of them. At the time of her death, Toyah was in a relationship with a man named Marco Hines. By most accounts, they seemed happy together, sharing photos on social media, going on weekend trips, enjoying life. But as we'll discover later, there may have been some complexities beneath the surface that didn't come to light until after the tragedy. Let's talk about the day everything changed. October 21st, 2018. It was a Sunday, a beautiful day in Cairns. Toyah had plans to take her boyfriend's dog, a beautiful animal named Indy, for a walk on the beach. The beach she chose was Wangetti Beach, a remote and secluded stretch of coastline about 45 minutes north of Cairns, situated between Cairns and Port Douglas. This wasn't unusual for Toyah. She went to Wangetti Beach regularly. It was one of her favorite spots to walk Indy, enjoy the ocean breeze, and sometimes take a swim. That afternoon, surveillance footage captured Toyah at the Rusty's Markets in Cairns, doing some grocery shopping. She looked relaxed, normal, going about her day like any other Sunday. After her shopping, she drove her black Mitsubishi Lancer north, along the Captain Cook Highway toward Wangetti Beach. She arrived at the beach parking area in the late afternoon. Cell tower data confirmed her phone was active in that area. She grabbed Indy's leash and headed down to the sand. And that's where the story takes its dark turn. When Toyah didn't come home that night, and when she didn't answer her phone, her family immediately knew something was wrong. This wasn't like her. She was responsible. She stayed in touch. She wouldn't just disappear without telling anyone. Her family and friends started searching for her that same night. But it was difficult because Wangetti Beach is remote. There are no lights, no facilities, and the nearest house is miles away. They had to wait until morning to conduct a proper search. On the morning of October 22nd, about 12 people gathered at the beach. Family, friends, community members, everyone wanted to help find Toyah. They spread out across the sand, searching through dunes, pathways, and bushland. It was Toyah's father, Toyah Cordingley, who made the heartbreaking discovery. As he walked along the beach, he noticed an area where the sand looked disturbed, like it had been freshly moved or piled up. Something made him stop and look closer. He started to brush away the sand with his hands, and that's when he saw it, a foot, his daughter's foot. Toyah immediately reeled backward, screaming for help. Toyah had been buried in a shallow grave right there on the beach. She was lying on her side, partially covered with sand. It was clear she had been murdered. Nearby, about 30 meters away, they found Indy, Toyah's dog, tied so tightly to a tree that the poor animal couldn't even sit down. But Indy was unharmed, just traumatized and waiting. And this raises an interesting question. Why would someone take the time to carefully tie up a dog, making sure it would be found, but then try to hide the body? What does that tell us about the person responsible? The scene was horrific. Police arrived and immediately secured the area. This was now a crime scene, and they had a murder investigation on their hands. When the forensic team examined Toyah's body, they found she had suffered 26 stab wounds. The injuries to her neck were what ultimately caused her death. But here's what made this even more disturbing. The post-mortem examination revealed that Toyah was likely still alive when she was buried. There was evidence suggesting sand had entered her airways, indicating she may have been conscious during those final, terrifying moments. The number of stab wounds, 26, suggests something significant. Was this an act of rage, panic, or something else entirely? Forensic psychologists often say that excessive stabbing can indicate a personal connection or extreme emotional state. But we'll come back to that question later. All of Toyah's belongings were missing. Her phone, her clothing except for one item, her bag, everything was gone. The only thing left behind was a selfie stick, which would later become a crucial piece of evidence. The police immediately began their investigation. They started by analyzing cell tower data. Toyah's phone had continued to ping towers after she arrived at the beach, and the data showed it traveling south along the Captain Cook Highway, back toward Cairns. This meant someone had taken her phone and was moving with it. Investigators then did something really clever. They cross-referenced the phone's movement with surveillance cameras along the highway, and that's when they found something significant. A blue Alfa Romeo sedan, model 156, was captured on multiple cameras, traveling in perfect synchronization with Toyah's phone signal. The car appeared on camera after camera, minute by minute, following the exact route the phone was taking. According to prosecutors, it was traveling meter for meter, second for second, with the phone signal. Eventually, the phone signal stopped near the Barron River. Surveillance footage showed the same blue Alfa Romeo near the river just before the phone signal disappeared, and then driving away moments later. The phone had been thrown into the river. Now, the police had a vehicle to track down. They ran the registration and discovered the car belonged to a man named Rajwinder Singh. Rajwinder Singh, also known as Raj, was a 41-year-old nurse working at a hospital in Innisfail, a town about 90 minutes south of Cairns. He was married with 3 young children and lived with his wife, children, and parents. By all accounts, Singh was described as quiet, soft-spoken, and caring. His co-workers said he was professional and dedicated to his work. There was nothing in his background that would suggest he was capable of violence. In fact, people who knew him said he never carried a knife, not even a pocket knife. But here's where things get extremely suspicious, and where the first major questions arise. On October 22nd, the day after Toyah's murder, Singh didn't show up for work. He didn't call in sick. He didn't give any notice. He just didn't appear. That same day, he purchased a one-way ticket to India and left Australia. He left his wife, his 3 children, and his parents behind, without any proper explanation. He told them he'd be back in a couple of days, but that was a lie. When police went to question him, he was already gone. Now here's the question. Why would someone flee the country like this? Does it automatically mean guilt, or could there be other explanations? Keep that in mind as we continue. As the investigation continued, police discovered more evidence pointing towards Singh. First, there was the DNA evidence. On the selfie stick found near Toyah's body, forensic experts found DNA that was a very strong match to Rajwinder Singh. However, and this is important, the defense would later argue this wasn't a perfect match. They claimed it was a high probability but not absolute certainty. So the question becomes, how did DNA get on that selfie stick? And is the match strong enough to be definitive? Second, there were the cell tower records. Singh's phone was in the Wangetti Beach area at the time of the murder. In fact, the data suggested he arrived about 20 minutes before Toyah. This raises another question. If this was a random, opportunistic attack, why was he there first? Was he waiting for someone? Or was it truly just a coincidence? Third, there was his sudden departure from the country. Why would an innocent man flee Australia the very next day after a brutal murder occurred near where his phone was pinging? The prosecution argued this showed consciousness of guilt, but the defense had a different explanation, which we'll get to. Fourth, medical records showed that Singh sought treatment for cuts and injuries on his hands just days after Toyah's murder. These were described as shallow cuts and bruising. The prosecution said this was consistent with someone who had been in a physical struggle. And remember, the forensic evidence showed that Toyah fought back against her attacker. But could these injuries have come from something else? We don't have photographic evidence of these wounds, which leaves room for interpretation. Police also discovered that Singh had called a travel agent and claimed there was a family emergency in India, that his grandfather was very ill. But investigators later confirmed his grandfather was in good health. It was all a lie to justify his sudden departure, or was it? We'll explore what Singh's defense team had to say about this. With all this evidence, Australian authorities issued an arrest warrant for Rajwinder Singh. They contacted Interpol and requested assistance from Indian authorities for his extradition. But finding him proved incredibly difficult. Singh had effectively disappeared. He wasn't living at any registered address. He wasn't using his real name consistently. According to some reports, he even posed as a pilgrim to stay at temples, using false identities to avoid detection. His family in Australia claimed they had no idea where he was. His wife said she hadn't heard from him regularly and that he had cut off most communication. The family home was eventually repossessed by the bank because they couldn't keep up with the mortgage payments after Singh left. For nearly 4 years, Rajwinder Singh remained on the run in India, evading capture. And this raises questions too. How did he survive for 4 years? Did he have help, financial support, a network of people protecting him? Or was he truly alone, living as a fugitive? Then, in November 2021, the Queensland police made a bold move. They announced a reward of $1 million Australian dollars for information leading to Singh's arrest. This was a massive reward, and it got a lot of attention in India. Within weeks of the reward being announced, tips started coming in. And finally, in November 2022, Singh was arrested in Delhi. He was walking alone, carrying no identification. At first, he denied his identity, but after verification, he admitted he was Rajwinder Singh. The extradition process took several more months. Singh fought it, claiming he wouldn't receive a fair trial in Australia. But in March 2023, Indian authorities formally handed him over to Australian police. and he was flown back to Queensland. The person or people who provided the tip that led to his arrest received the $1 million reward, which was reportedly split among several individuals. Rajwinder Singh's case finally went to trial in July 2024, nearly 6 years after Toyah's murder. But here's where it gets complicated. This was actually his second trial. The first trial, held about 8 months earlier, resulted in a hung jury. The jury couldn't reach a unanimous decision, so a mistrial was declared. This is significant. It means that at least some jurors had reasonable doubt about Singh's guilt. What evidence or arguments created that doubt? We don't know the details of the jury's deliberations, but it suggests the case wasn't as clear-cut as it might seem. But in the second trial, after 3 weeks of evidence, 82 witnesses, a week of closing statements, and 7 hours of jury deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. On December 8, 2024, Rajwinder Singh was found guilty of murdering Toyah Cordingley. He was sentenced to life in prison. Throughout both trials, Singh maintained his innocence. His defense team argued that the case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence. There were no eyewitnesses to the actual crime. The murder weapon was never found, and while Singh's DNA was present at the scene, they argued the match wasn't definitive enough to prove beyond reasonable doubt that he was the killer. But here's where Singh's story gets really interesting and where more questions emerge. During an undercover police operation after his arrest, Singh was recorded talking to an undercover officer in a watch house. In that recording, he made a startling claim. He said he witnessed Toyah being killed by masked men on the beach. He said, "It happened right in front of me. I ran for my life. They were going to kill me as well. That was my biggest mistake, running away." Now, the prosecution argued this was clearly a fabrication, a desperate attempt to explain away his presence at the scene and his flight from the country. But Singh's defense used this statement to paint a different picture. They said Singh was in an unhappy marriage. He had tried to leave his wife before, but was denied a divorce. Earlier that same year, he'd stayed with his cousin for a week or 10 days, trying to escape his situation. They argued that his sudden departure to India was another attempt to flee his unhappy life, not to escape justice for murder. According to the defense, Singh stumbled upon a horrible crime in progress, panicked, and ran. And because he was already in a troubled mental state and unhappy in his marriage, he made the terrible decision to flee the country rather than go to the police. Was he afraid he'd be blamed? Was he in shock? The defense suggested this explained his actions without proving he committed the crime, but there are obvious problems with this story. If he witnessed masked men killing Toyah, why didn't he call the police once he was safely away? Why did he throw her phone in the river? How did his DNA end up at the scene? And why did he lie about his grandfather being sick? The jury ultimately didn't believe Singh's account. But it does raise questions about what really happened. If his story is completely false, why tell it? What was he hoping to achieve? And if there's even a grain of truth to it, what does that mean? One of the biggest unresolved questions in this case is, why? What was the motive? The prosecution described this as an opportunistic murder. They suggested Singh and Toyah crossed paths on the beach. Some kind of confrontation occurred, and it escalated into violence. But they couldn't explain what sparked that confrontation. There's no evidence Singh and Toyah knew each other. They didn't work together, didn't have mutual friends, didn't frequent the same places. So what would cause a seemingly mild-mannered nurse with no history of violence to suddenly commit such a brutal crime against a complete stranger? Some have speculated about possible motives. Was it sexual in nature? The evidence doesn't support this. Was it robbery? But why kill her for a phone and some personal items? Was it a case of mistaken identity? That seems unlikely, given how remote the location was. The lack of a clear motive is troubling because it makes the crime feel random and senseless, and that's terrifying for the community. If there's no motive, if it truly was random, then it could have happened to anyone. But is that really what occurred? Or is there something we're missing? The defense suggested that whoever killed Toyah did so either in extreme anger or while affected by drugs. But there's no evidence Singh was using drugs. And what would he be angry about if he didn't know Toyah? These questions remain unanswered. Now, this is where we need to tread carefully, because we're not here to accuse anyone or point fingers. But there are aspects of Toyah's personal life that came to light during the investigation, and they add another layer of complexity to this case. Late in the investigation, police discovered that in the weeks before her death, Toyah had been communicating with another man named Tyson. These weren't just casual messages, they were personal, emotional conversations. Through advanced digital forensics, investigators were able to recover some of these deleted messages. In these messages, Toyah expressed doubts about her relationship with Marco Hines. She mentioned feeling emotionally strained. In one message, she wrote about Marco losing his temper, saying, "He lost it again. I don't feel safe. Maybe it's time to end it." In another message, she mentioned wanting to get away and take some space from the situation. She also told Tyson she was keeping their conversation secret to avoid causing more conflict. Now, it's important to note, these messages don't prove anything about what happened at Wangetti Beach. But they do show us that Toyah's life was more complicated than it appeared on the surface. And they raise questions. Did Marco know about these messages? If so, when did he find out? Could there have been tensions in the relationship that played any role in what happened? Or is this just a tragic coincidence? A young woman struggling with relationship problems who then became the victim of a random attack? Police did re-examine Marco's movements and alibi after discovering these messages. According to official statements, he was in Cairns at the time of the murder. But there were some gaps in the timeline. His phone activity dropped significantly during the crucial hours when Toyah was at the beach, and there were unconfirmed reports that his vehicle may have been seen near an exit toward the Captain Cook Highway that evening. Marco was questioned extensively. He denied any involvement and said he didn't know about Toyah's doubts or her communication with another man. Investigators noted some inconsistencies in his statements, but there was never enough evidence to charge him with anything. He was eventually cleared. It's also worth noting that Marco's stepfather was a police officer. During the trial, Singh's defense raised questions about whether this connection influenced how thoroughly Marco was investigated. They suggested the investigation may have focused too quickly on Singh while not fully exploring other possibilities. Again, we're not making accusations here. We're simply laying out the facts and the questions that emerged during the investigation. The jury heard all of this evidence and still convicted Singh. But it does make you wonder, have all the angles been fully explored? Beyond the question of motive and Toyah's personal life, there are other elements of this case that don't quite add up. First, let's talk about the beach itself. Wangetti Beach is remote, but it wasn't completely deserted. It was a Sunday afternoon. How is it possible that absolutely no one saw anything? No one saw Toyah walking her dog. No one saw Singh's distinctive blue Alfa Romeo. No one heard anything unusual. The defense pointed out that several other men were known to frequent Wangetti Beach, some of them carrying large knives for pig hunting or personal protection. Were all of these individuals identified and questioned? Could any of them have been involved? Second, there's the matter of the 26 stab wounds. That level of violence suggests either extreme rage or someone in a highly altered state. Singh had no history of violence, no history of rage, no indication of drug use. So where did this brutality come from? Is it possible for someone with no violent history to suddenly commit such a frenzied attack? Psychologists say yes, it's possible under certain circumstances, but it's unusual. Third, Let's think about the logistics of the crime. Singh allegedly killed Toyah, buried her body, tied up her dog, gathered all her belongings, drove back toward Cairns while disposing of her phone, and then went home. All of this without leaving significant evidence beyond the DNA on the selfie stick. That requires a certain level of composure and planning, but if this was a spontaneous, opportunistic attack born of sudden rage, how did he maintain that level of control? Fourth, the murder weapon was never found. Where is it? How did Singh dispose of it so thoroughly that it's never been recovered? And why were Toyah's clothes and other belongings never found either? These items simply vanished. And finally, there's Singh's confession in India. He initially admitted to having some connection to what happened, then retracted it, claiming he was coerced. What exactly did he say in that initial confession? The details were never fully made public. Why was it deemed questionable enough that it couldn't be used as strong evidence at trial? Let's go back to that first trial for a moment, because I think it's significant. A hung jury means the jurors couldn't agree. In a murder trial, that's a big deal. It means at least one or more jurors looked at all the evidence and said, "I'm not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt." What created that doubt? We can speculate based on what we know. The lack of a clear motive, the absence of the murder weapon, no eyewitnesses, questions about the DNA evidence, inconsistencies or gaps in the overall narrative. The second trial had essentially the same evidence, just presented again with slightly different arguments. This time, the jury convicted. But that first hung jury tells us something important. This case, even with all the evidence against Singh, isn't as simple as it might appear. The murder of Toyah Cordingley absolutely shook the Cairns community. For years, you couldn't drive through town without seeing "Justice for Toyah" bumper stickers on cars. Vigils were held. Donations poured into the animal shelter where she volunteered. Her story became a rallying cry for justice. During jury selection, potential jurors were specifically asked if they had "Justice for Toyah" bumper stickers, if they'd attended her funeral, if they donated to any related causes, or if they were members of any Justice for Toyah social media groups. That's how deeply this case affected the region. It was impossible to find someone in Cairns who wasn't touched by it in some way. Toyah's parents, Troy and Vanessa, attended every single day of both trials. They sat quietly, dignified, maintaining their composure even when gruesome evidence was presented. The only times they left the courtroom were when crime scene photos were being shown, and they were given advance notice so they could step out. When the guilty verdict was finally announced, they spoke briefly outside the courthouse. They thanked the police for their tireless work. They asked for privacy as they tried to process everything. They were gracious and respectful throughout the entire ordeal, even though they were living through every parent's worst nightmare. The community finally had some closure, or at least the official end of the legal process. But many questions remain, and the pain of losing Toyah will never fully heal. As of now, Rajwinder Singh has been convicted and sentenced to life in prison, but he continues to maintain his innocence. He has 28 days from the verdict to file an appeal, and his lawyers have indicated they're considering doing so. If an appeal is filed, the case could be reviewed by a higher court. They might examine whether the trial was conducted fairly, whether the evidence was properly presented, or whether there were any legal errors that could have affected the outcome. Singh's barrister has refused to comment publicly beyond saying he hopes to continue representing Singh, which suggests an appeal is likely. So even though there's been a conviction, this story may not be over, and that means the questions may continue. Look, I want to be clear about something. A jury heard all the evidence. They deliberated. They reached a verdict. The justice system has spoken, and we have to respect that process. But respecting the verdict doesn't mean we can't ask questions or acknowledge that some things remain unexplained. The evidence against Singh is substantial. The DNA, the cell phone tracking, his car following Toyah's phone, his sudden flight from the country, his lies about why he was leaving, the injuries on his hands, it all paints a damning picture. And yet, there are gaps. Why did he do it? How did he dispose of the weapon and her belongings so completely? What really happened in those moments on the beach? Were there any other people involved or nearby? What about the complications in Toyah's personal life? Do they mean anything, or are they just tragic coincidences? I think the most honest answer is, we may never know the complete truth. We know that Toyah Cordingley was murdered. We know she died horribly and far too young. We know the courts have determined that Rajwinder Singh is responsible. But the full story of why and exactly how it happened, some of those details may be lost forever. And that's what haunts cases like this. The uncertainty, the feeling that there's something just out of reach that would make everything make sense. For me, the most heartbreaking part isn't even the unanswered questions. It's thinking about Toyah's final moments. She was a young woman who loved animals, who helped people, who had her whole life ahead of her. She went to a beach she loved, with a dog she was caring for, on a beautiful Sunday afternoon. And in a matter of minutes, all of that was taken away. I also think about Indy, that dog, tied to that tree, waiting helplessly. Animals sense when something is wrong, and I can only imagine what that poor creature experienced. This case reminds us that danger can find us anywhere, even in places we consider safe. Wangetti Beach was Toyah's happy place, somewhere she went to find peace. And that's where her life ended. It's a sobering reminder to stay aware of our surroundings, to trust our instincts, to tell people where we're going, and to look out for one another. All right, I want to hear from you now. And I really mean it. I want to know what you think. After hearing all of this, do you believe justice has been served? Do you think Rajwinder Singh is guilty, beyond all doubt? Or do you think there are questions that should have been answered before a conviction? What about the motive? Does the lack of a clear motive bother you, or do you accept that some crimes are just random and senseless? What about the other aspects of the case? The complexities in Toyah's personal life, the men who frequented the beach with knives, the first jury that couldn't reach a verdict? And here's maybe the most important question. In cases like this, where there's substantial circumstantial evidence but also unanswered questions, what's the right balance? How certain do we need to be before we convict someone of murder? I don't have all the answers, but I think these are conversations worth having. And again, where are you watching from? Let me know your city or country in the comments. I'm genuinely curious to see how this case resonates with people in different parts of the world. If you found this deep dive informative and thought-provoking, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more content like this, where we don't just cover the basic facts, but really dig into the complexities and unanswered questions. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Behind the Crime Scene. We cover cases like this every week, diving deep into the details, exploring multiple perspectives, and always asking the questions that need to be asked. We don't sensationalize. We don't make accusations. We just present the facts and let you draw your own conclusions. You can also follow us on social media for updates, behind-the-scenes content, community discussions, and to join our growing family of true crime enthusiasts who value thoughtful analysis over clickbait. Links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching and for engaging thoughtfully with this difficult case. Remember, behind every crime, there are real people, real families, real pain. We honor Toyah's memory by seeking truth and asking hard questions, even when the answers aren't easy. Stay safe out there, everyone. Trust your instincts. Look after each other. And remember, even when cases are officially solved, sometimes the most important questions are the ones we keep asking. Until next time, this is Behind the Crime Scene, signing off.